And I realized there's no such thing as a mentor-mentee relationship. It's a mentor-mentor relationship. And sometimes you're the teacher and sometimes you're the student. Sometimes it goes this way, but it's a genuine, real, loving friendship with all of the things that all friendships have. It has trust, it has devotion.
Simon, we first met, gosh, back, I think at Conscious Capitalism, one of the conferences before.
The very first one.
Start With Why hadn't come out yet. You were just this young guy, you know, in his early 30s. Not too many people knew who you were, and look at you now. Now you're solidly in midlife. What age do you think you're going to live to?
I have no idea. I mean, if it's based on my family history, my dad's parents weren't that old, but my mother's side did very well. My grandmother just recently passed in her mid-90s, so
let's say
maybe somewhere in the middle.
So 90, could we say 90 maybe?
I think that's a bit generous, but you know, sure.
Well, you know, healthcare is getting better, you know, medical technology. So what percentage of your adult life is still ahead of you?
Oh, I see.
Starting at if we start counting at age 18, I'll tell you, 61% of your adult life is still ahead of you, Simon.
Isn't that amazing? What an amazing thought.
Well, we don't think that way.
Well, I mean, I think in terms of career life rather than life.
So how much of your career is still ahead of you?
So I'm not even halfway through.
Yeah.
Because, you know, if I think about the path that I've been on, I have that and more still ahead of me.
Yeah.
You know, assuming things go well.
I think they will. I think actually, frankly, one of the qualities as we get older that gets better is connecting the dots, that crystallized intelligence, synthetic thinking. And I think you've always been good at that. I think you'll only get better.
Thank you.
So how are you enjoying midlife? Like, what is it? And how would you define midlife? And do you see something shifting in your life these days at age 46?
You know, I've always had friendships that were a broad range of ages, and growing up, most of my friends were older than me. And one of the nice things about being right where I am is that range is now huge, right? Where I'm actually in the middle of my friends. So I have friends who are 20 years older and 20 years younger. And I like that, because as I get older, I won't be in the middle of the range. I'll be at the end. But I like that I sit in between this really broad range of remarkable human beings with very different points of view and different perspectives, and somewhat informed by their age.
Yeah, somewhat. I think you got in. Did you get in hot water, would you say, with millennials when you were?
No,
not really. I think you were just telling the truth.
I mean, first of all, I never accused them of being anything. What's really funny about that video that you're referring to is I say millennials have been accused of being. Yeah. And somebody cut it and they took that out.
I promise I won't do that, Simon.
But no, I didn't get in hot water. There was a couple people who got upset by it, but it's amazing how many people stopped me or sent in emails and said, you described me, or I thought it was me, and I didn't realize the experience that I'm having was shared by so many people. So it made people feel not alone.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a criticism as much as it was observational. You know, I studied ethnography and anthropology in college, and sort of that's my approach.
You did.
Let's look at these patterns of human behavior. Yeah, that's what I.
Oh, so interesting. So I'm a huge Arnold van Gennep fan. Rites of passage work. You know, the idea of initiations and rituals, and how do you help people through. So one of the things that's interesting. Let's go there. There were 3 new stages of life that got introduced to the 20th century. Adolescence, which didn't have a word until 1904 and led to public junior high schools and high schools, and no more, and child labor laws, and no more working in the mines at age 16 or 14. Retirement, 1930s, you know, Social Security, pensions, and midlife. Midlife, 1965, coined with a very bad brand, midlife crisis. The first 2 have gotten a ton of government policy, financial support. Midlife,
good branding.
Good branding. Midlife just got, you know, an awful brand and frankly, no financial support. So what do you think about the idea of midlife, and especially the idea of finding purpose, finding your why? Do you think someone's why changes over the course of their lifetime? And does it actually move more into a place of legacy, later in life? Any thoughts on that? Or on Arnold van Gennep, who's the guy who studied tribes and found that there was this 3-stage rite of passage that people do during transitional times.
So in terms of your why, our why is every individual has one, whether you know it or not, whether you're able to articulate it or not, everybody has one, because we are the sum totals of how we were raised. Our why is probably fully formed by the time we're in our probably mid to late teens. And then the rest of our lives offer us an opportunity to live in balance with our why or not. So when we feel like we're in the flow, or we feel like I'm doing the thing that I was meant to do, it's because we've made decisions that put us in balance with who we are. And when we make decisions that put us out of balance, then everything feels off, or increased amount of stress. Even people around us will say, it's like, I don't know who you are anymore, right? Because you are who you are. So your why doesn't change. Crisis doesn't change your why. Age doesn't change your why. Why is an origin story. It's where you come from. And so what does change, I think, is as we get older, we hopefully become more confident making decisions that are consistent with our why. We become more confident to make a decision that is authentic to us. I'm not a huge fan of the words authentic. I think it's overused. But if we want to define it, authenticity means that I say and do the things that I actually believe. And so when we were young, there's all these other kinds of pressures, be smart, be successful, all of these. And so sometimes we make decisions. You see people do this in their career, where they make a decision to take the job that pays them more, not to take the job that they think they'll enjoy more, or work with people that they get along with better. And so I would argue that those decisions put us out of balance, which is why they increase stress. So age does not change your why at all, but it provides an opportunity. I think it provides confidence to live within balance with that why, which is why it's so great. I mean, my favorite thing to do is ask advice from older people, because they don't give a shit what you think about them. They're just going to tell you what they think.
Exactly.
Because they're so past the age of caring, and so I think old people are so fantastic to get advice from.
Unvarnished insight is what I call it. Unvarnished insight. I mean, just there's candor. Is purpose the same thing as why?
The reason I didn't use the word purpose or vision or brand or cause or any of these, I didn't use any of these words, is because none of them had standard definitions, and they were all used interchangeably. But the problem was people used the same words with different definitions, or they had different definitions for the same words. And so it was impossible for us to have a conversation about these things. And so when I went to people who believe, for example, mission comes first, and they said, well, it's why we get out of bed in the morning. And people who believed vision comes first, because I got tired of having the debate, which comes first, vision or mission, they said, well, it's why we do what we do. So I called it the why, so we could all have a common language. So I mean, the answer is it the same as purpose? Depends on your definition of purpose.
So actually, I love the fact that this is extemporaneous, because the ideas are flooding into me as I'm talking. And one of them is like, wow, why and whys. So how are you, Mr. Why, more wise today at 46 than you were at age 26? What's the evidence of the fact you've cultivated and harvested some wisdom along the way?
I mean, I think every person who gains age will say the same thing, which is when we were young, we thought we knew everything. And as we got older, we realize we know nothing. I think we all say that. I think we all have that realization. And I think it's evident in my work. The first book that I wrote so many years ago, it is a simple, elegant idea, and it's an easy read. It's a nice, simple little book. Start with why. And if you read my recent work, even Leaders Eat Last, it's a way more mature, sophisticated book. It has a lot of depth. It has a lot of meat. It's not. Sometimes some people disagree with elements of it, and I think Infinite Game is even more that. And I'm starting to raise more questions than I am providing answers. I think in the first book I attempted to provide answers, and now I think I'm offering more questions.
So let's explore that. It's like very Socratic. The whole premise of Socrates was, a catalytic question can illuminate a life. And so isn't it interesting that as we get older, we learn how to potentially get better at asking the questions that help to illuminate our lives and those around us. I know for me at Airbnb with Brian Chesky, I enjoyed my relationship mentoring him and having, frankly, him mentor me much of the time when we were asking each other questions.
Yeah. I've had the same experience. There's many years ago. So let's talk about mentorship for a second, because it's come up. Mm-hmm. I think the concept of mentorship is completely misunderstood. You get emails, dear Chip, I'm a huge fan of your work. Will you be my mentor? Right? Yes. Which is, by the way, the same thing as a stranger walking up to you on the street and be like, hey, will you be my friend? And you'd be
it's like popping the M word. Would you actually say, I want to get married to you when you first meet them?
I think people misunderstand what the concept of mentorship is, which is mentorship is a relationship. It's a real relationship like friendship, or as you talked about, there's a dating that happens. And a mentor is someone who always has time for you, willingly. Not like, oh, I got to talk to my mentee today, and my discovery of this, what mentorship really is, was organic. There was a gentleman by the name of Ron Bruder, who still is a very successful entrepreneur. And somebody introduced me to him. And I went and met him at his office. This was in the early days of my career. And he was fantastic and wonderful and offered me all this wonderful guidance. And like a few weeks later, I had a question and I was like, I wonder if Ron knows the answer. And so I called and he took my call. And I called sometime again and he took my call again. And then we went out for lunch and he always made time for me. Mm-hmm. And eventually a friendship emerged and he was really my mentor. I've learned tremendous amounts from him. Even today, our company obeys something that I call the Bruder principles, which are all these little lessons I learned from Ron that I've now passed on. And I remember I was at his house one time and I was just saying goodbye. And I put my arm around him and I said the M word for the first time. I put my arm around him and I said, I love that you're my mentor. And he said something back that I did not expect. It caught me completely by surprise. And he said, and I love that you're mine. And that's when I realized, I thought this generous man was just passing on all his wisdom to me, but I didn't realize that the questions I was asking, or even some of my points of view on the world, he was learning also. And I realized there's no such thing as a mentor-mentee relationship. It's a mentor-mentor relationship. And sometimes you're the teacher and sometimes you're the student. Sometimes it goes this way, but it's a genuine, real, loving friendship with all of the things that all friendships have. It has trust, it has devotion, it has honesty. And so this whole idea of somebody like saying, will you be my mentor, or offering strangers, I'll be your mentor. It's nonsense. Because you can't have, a mentor and a mentor is different than a champion. People mistake that as well, which is a champion, and you can have both. That's fine. A champion is someone that can go to bat for you, right? Like at work, like, hey, put in a good word for me for a promotion. Right? And that person may give you advice too, but that's a champion. A mentor, the best mentors aren't in your chain of command, and they can't impact your career at all. They're just going to tell you the unvarnished point of view that they have about whatever situation you're providing them. And I think that's a very special relationship that needs to be cherished and nurtured like any relationship, quite frankly.
So what I hear you saying is it's really about reciprocity. There's a reciprocity that happens in a mentor relationship. And we here at the Modern Elder Academy, MEA, call it, we're a mentern. We're a mentor and an intern at the same time. And we're all mentorns. Brian Chesky and I have been mentorns for 7.5 years. And Joe Gebbia, who I know you know pretty well as well, and all those guys. I've been a mentoring with Joe. And I think that's what I've, Peter Drucker's been one of my favorites for a long time, the management theorist. He wrote 2/3 of his business books after the age of 65. And he was all about being curious and wise at the same time. And couldn't we all do that? I mean, learn how to be curious to open up possibility and wise to distill down what's truly essential. So that's my goal for the next decade coming ahead. I'm going to ask one last question and then we're going to wrap. But first of all, it's great to see you. Thank you for being here.
Always a joy.
So if mutual mentorship is frankly the future of maybe learning and development in companies, and it's a lot less expensive than most company L&D programs, and we have 5 generations in many workplaces today. What is the future of intergenerational collaboration? Or how do we learn from each other? And do we overemphasize the generational quality of this? Or do, you know, is there are there some fundamentals that maybe define one person versus another based upon the cohort that they were born into? And how is it like an intergenerational potluck more than it is, you know, an intergenerational war?
You know, one of the criticisms I got when I did that millennial video was like, how can you make generalizations about an entire generation? Well, of course you can make generalizations about an entire generation because there's a shared common experience. Like our grandparents who grew up during the Depression or the war were frugal and miserly for the rest of their lives. They reused tinfoil and saved every jam jar. There's nothing wrong with them. It's because they grew up during the Depression and the war, right? And so it informs your worldview. And so each generation, you know, and they're fuzzy. You know, a generation's about 20 years, and an early millennial versus a late millennial, or early Xer versus a late, they're different. But they shared information. So boomers grew up with parents who came back from war and said, I lost my childhood. I want to provide everything for you. It allowed for the hippie movement to exist. You couldn't have hippies without wealth. Your parents had to be wealthy for you to not work, you know? And they also grew up during Richard Nixon and Vietnam. And so there's a lot of cynicism to authority. Well, that's very defining of boomers and the boomer generation, very individualistic, you know? Mm-hmm. Then the millennials grew up because they're the first generation to come of age during September 11th, but also the first generation to come of age where the internet and social media and cell phones were ubiquitous in their lives. And so, of course, it informs a worldview. Is that everyone in the generation? Of course not.
And you're an Xer. What about the Xers? You're a Gen Xer.
We're the forgotten generation. That's why we have X. It's the unknown variable. So I think what's so funny about Gen X is we grew up largely during boom years, right? We're largely kids of the 80s. And life was good, kinder, gentler, Cold War, you know, is just, and I think what's so defining about Xers is we didn't have much to fight against, you know, and we kind of just got to work, you know, and you tend to see that Gen Xers have an unbalanced amount of success at a younger age. So they were making, you know, VP of their company at 39 or 40 and not 50, you know, and so, and the joke that I would make for a long time, which is, you know, a Gen X revolutionary, you know, doesn't wear tie-dye, they wear Prada, you know? They did well, but they're still consciously minded and they're still trying to affect change and stir the pot inside their organizations. But they're a very quiet generation. They kind of just got to work, you know? And you see that is even now in leadership positions, a lot of Gen Xers are in their companies stirring pots, affecting change. They're just quiet. So my point is that each generation has a point of view that is valid to the other generations. And each generation has a point of view informed by how they grew up that the other generations cannot fully appreciate. In other words, the truth is somewhere in the middle. So it's not that a boomer or an Xer has all of the wisdom, and it's not that a millennial or a Gen Z has everything to learn. They both have points of view and perspective. Now, of course, experience counts for a lot. And what young people, the ones who will do well in life, appreciate the learning of the experience that others have had. Doesn't mean they have to agree, but they appreciate the learning and experience that others have had. Older generations that continue to learn and continue to grow as individuals and in their organizations appreciate the younger generation has a different set of information and a different point of view. You know, if we want to celebrate millennials and Gen Z, they're one of the most accepting generations. They are the most accepting generations we've got. They don't care about where you're from. They don't care what your sexuality is. They don't care what your gender identity is. They know that sexuality and gender identity are different things. Older generations can't comprehend that, you know? And they just are like, yeah, whatever you want to do, be you, that's fine, whatever. It's like literally a big nothing. And I think that's something that older generations can really learn from, quite frankly.
Absolutely.
So I think that when both have curiosity about the other, that's when both will thrive.
Beautiful. Well, I feel like I've been thriving with 20 minutes of Simon time. Whenever Simon says, I'm listening. And so thank you for joining me, Simon. And look forward to seeing you when we finally can see each other again in person.
I look forward to it. Stay safe, and always a joy to see you.